Welcome to Money Decoded.
There is a significant assumption most people carry about wealth and debt without ever examining it. The assumption that access to more money means access to more comfortable borrowing. That the wealthy, precisely because they could absorb the risk, are the ones least afraid of a large balance, the biggest mortgage, the most leveraged position. In our previous video, we looked at the distinction genuinely wealthy families draw between assets and income, and how that distinction reorganizes an entire relationship with spending. Today, we are looking at the other half of that same mental model, the old money rule about debt that almost never gets said out loud because it runs in nearly the opposite direction from what most people assume. The genuinely wealthy are not comfortable with debt. They are, in almost every meaningful sense, more averse to it than the household living paycheck to paycheck. And the specific shape of that aversion is what we are examining today.
The first habit is the line the wealthy draw between debt that builds and debt that spends. And it is a line drawn with almost no exceptions. Debt taken against something appreciating, something that produces income or is reasonably expected to grow in value, a mortgage on a rental property, a loan against a business that generates returns well above the interest owed, is treated as a tool. Debt taken to fund a lifestyle, a vacation financed on a card, furniture bought on an installment plan, a car loan for something that loses value the moment it leaves the lot, is treated as something closer to a structural failure. Not a moral failure exactly, but a sign that cash flow and spending have become misaligned in a way that needs correcting rather than financing. This is the same distinction between assets and income we examined before, applied specifically to borrowing. The wealthy family will comfortably carry a mortgage on a property producing rental income that exceeds the loan payment because the debt is doing work. That same family will treat a $5,000 balance on a credit card used for everyday spending as an emergency requiring immediate attention because that debt is doing nothing except costing money every month it exists.
The second habit is a level of tracking that borders on obsessive, applied specifically to anything owed. A genuinely wealthy household can, without checking anything, state exactly what debt exists, at what rate, against what asset, and on what timeline it will be resolved. This is not because they enjoy the accounting. It is because unexamined debt is precisely the mechanism by which a manageable position becomes an unmanageable one. And the family that has built real wealth over time has almost always learned this lesson at some earlier point, sometimes expensively. Ask yourself the same test they apply to themselves. Is this debt buying something that pays me or something that costs me? If you cannot answer that question immediately for every balance you carry, you have already identified the gap between how you relate to debt and how the genuinely wealthy do.
The third habit is the quiet rule about depreciating purchases, specifically the rule that a car, a piece of furniture, an appliance, anything that loses value the moment it is used gets paid for in cash or not purchased at all. This sounds like simple frugality, but the reasoning underneath it is more precise than that. Financing a depreciating asset means paying interest on something that is simultaneously losing value, a genuinely losing proposition on two fronts at once. The wealthy family that could easily qualify for a low-interest auto loan frequently does not take one, not because the interest rate is unreasonable, but because the entire category of debt against a depreciating asset has been excluded from consideration as a matter of policy rather than case-by-case evaluation. Removing the decision entirely, the same pre-committed rule we examined in a previous video about waiting periods before purchases, means the family never has to relitigate the temptation every time a new car or a new sofa looks appealing on a payment plan. The fourth habit runs deeper than arithmetic, and it explains why this aversion persists even among families who could easily service far more debt than they carry. Debt, for genuinely wealthy households, is treated as a last resort rather than a convenience, and that framing produces behavior that a purely mathematical analysis would not predict. A household comfortable with debt as a tool of convenience will finance something because the payment fits the monthly budget. A household that treats debt as a last resort will ask a different question entirely.
whether this purchase is worth making at all if it cannot be made in cash. That second question eliminates an enormous category of spending before it happens, not because the math forbids it, but because the psychological bar for taking on any obligation has been set high enough that most discretionary purchases simply do not clear it. The aversion is not primarily financial. It is closer to an inherited discomfort with owing anyone anything, and it functions as a filter on spending that operates upstream of any specific financial calculation.
The fifth habit is the one that looks, from the outside, like a contradiction of everything already described, and it is the use of credit lines not as spending power, but as insurance. Genuinely wealthy families frequently maintain substantial credit facilities, lines against a portfolio, standing arrangements with private banks, access to capital that could be drawn on quickly. The distinction is that this access exists to be available, not to be used. It functions the way an emergency fund functions for a household further down the wealth spectrum, a buffer against a moment when liquidity is needed faster than assets can be sold without loss, rather than a resource drawn down for ordinary spending. The credit line sits unused for years, sometimes decades, its entire value residing in the fact that it could be activated instantly if circumstances required it. This is debt in name only. It shares almost nothing in spirit with the debt taken on to fund a lifestyle, and treating the two as the same category is exactly the confusion that genuinely wealthy have learned to avoid. What unites these 5 habits is a single underlying principle, that debt is a tool for building or protecting assets, and almost never a tool for funding the way a family lives day to day. The mortgage against income-producing property, the business loan against a venture generating returns above its cost, the standby credit line held in reserve, all of these share the same structure, debt in service of something that produces or protects value. The car loan, the credit card balance carried for convenience, the financed vacation share the opposite structure, debt in service of consumption that produces nothing and simply costs money until it is repaid. The genuinely wealthy family has not eliminated debt from its life. It has sorted debt into 2 categories with almost no overlap and treats one with comfort and the other with something close to alarm. The transferable lesson is not that anyone watching needs a portfolio large enough to qualify for a private credit line. It is that the question underneath all 5 habits, does this debt build or protect something, or does it simply fund how I am living right now, is a question available to a household at any level of wealth, and one that most households never explicitly ask, because debt has been normalized as simply another form of monthly payment, rather than examined as the 2 fundamentally different categories it actually represents. If this video changed how you think about the debt you currently carry, hit the like button and share it with someone who would find it useful. Subscribe if you haven't, and next week we're looking at the specific way old money families handle a recession differently than everyone assumes. See you then.